Hello and welcome to episode number 275. This is the Project Management Podcast at pm-podcast.com and I'm Cornelius Fichtner. Thanks for joining us. Prior to signing any project statement of work, it should be reviewed by your legal team. However, while legal experts understand legalities that will help you out in court, they are not project experts who can determine if a particular SOW will provide you with the product that you anticipate, that you need or desire. Todd C. Williams, on the other hand, is such an expert. He has reviewed dozens of statements of work for his clients. He analyzes the methodology, scope, deliverables, and proposed cost and finds areas that point to weaknesses in the ability to deliver or misalignment in intentions. In our discussion, we look at the main reasons behind doing a formal SOW review for your project, at the factors that show whether a formal review actually makes sense or not, some areas of concern during a review, and why a comma can make all the difference in the world. And now, enjoy the interview. Period.
The Project Management Podcasts feature interview.
Today with Todd Williams, expert witness, executive consultant, and president of eCameron.
Hello, Todd, and welcome back to the Project Management Podcast.
Thank you very much, Cornelius. It's a joy being back.
Yeah. So this is not the first time this week that you and I speak here over Skype. In fact, you and I, we meet regularly and we talk about how each other's businesses are doing. And during one of those discussions, you told me, hey, we as a company, we're now doing reviews of SOWs for our clients. And I'm like, you're doing what? That led to a very long discussion, and it ended with me inviting you here on the program to talk about what it is you're doing. But let's begin with the problem here. What do you see as the issue with project SOWs, with statements of work?
Well, people think that they are just boring. They think they're part of a contract. They just are part of this standard pack of stuff that we put in an envelope, we put on an email, we send it off and get it done. And they're not. These are really critical parts. They're not part of the contract. They are an addendum to the contract. They are a separate thing that actually says, what is it that I told you and you told me that we're going to do and we agree you can do for some set price. And that is really critical. So it is the focal document for communication between you and whoever's doing work for you.
Right. And I think there's one word you took out of my mouth here, boring, right? Many people think of this is boring, this is contractual, I'm not interested in this. And that's exactly why it's important that project managers hear this conversation and understand how important an SOW really is, right?
Yes, because now I may be a little bit geeky, and of course, because we talk, you exactly know how geeky I am with my business, but I think they're actually fairly exciting, and they tell you a story about what's going on and how people are working together. And there's a lot of culture embedded in these things that now then have to be extracted or inserted, depending on what end of it you're looking at. So, yeah, a number of people think they're boring, and they just scan through them. Oh, yeah, another boilerplate SOW. And boilerplates are great. Having that starting point is great, but you can't rely on a boilerplate. They just start to add things or leave things out, and you perpetuate mistakes. So people kind of look at that and say, oh, yeah, it's just standard. Just throw it on across the wall. And that is death. That is just sheer death every time.
And when we're talking about SOW, statements of work, what angle are we looking at here? Are we focused on SOWs that I'm sending out to a vendor and it becomes his project? Or are we talking about an SOW that a customer gives to me so that I can do a project estimate? Which directionality here are we focused on?
Well, Where I think most people have the least attention span around the SOW is the people who are receiving it. So if I am a company and I am subcontracting to somebody, that SOW that comes back to me that says, here's how I'm going to do the work, I think that there's less attention given to it at that point because there's a lot of distraction. That's only a small part, 3% of my entire project. So I kind of go through it really fast. Yep, that looks good, and send it on. Where on the supplier side, that's not 3% of the contract. That is the contract. And so they're usually spending a significant amount more time looking at that SOW. And can we really make it happen? And if we can't, what kind of strange words do we put in here to kind of waffle around this? Do we want to say, I had a discussion not too long ago with somebody about the word, are we managing or are we running this? And what's the meaning difference between those two words with respect to what actually gets done inside there? And so the people who are generally giving the SOW to somebody, they have a better, they've combed it better and they've manicured the words. Somebody on the receiving end may not notice all the nuances that are inside there. And so in general, where this has to be done is on that receiving side. As I'm receiving the SOW, it's not going to hurt for somebody on the sending side to do this either. But the real cost savings, the real business driver is for the people who are receiving the SOW.
And why should the project SOW undergo a review? Just because they are legally binding documents?
No. Okay, it is definitely they're legally binding documents. There's no question about that, but that's not the sole reason. Any document, be it an SOW or be it a functional specification or anything like that, needs to be clear. It's really defining where you're going and what you're doing. Let's split the contract and the SOW apart. And people will give me a lot of flack on this one. The contract is a piece of paper that tells you how I'm going to get into this contract, how I'm going to get into this agreement with you, and how I'm going to get out of it. It has terms in general about, we're going to sign this and we're going to go do this and we'll invoice you on this day and you're going to pay on that day and we're all mad and tired of one another. We'll exit the contract this way, or at some point in time we're done and that's how we're going to exit. So it's all about payments and entrance and exit out of that contract. The SOW is a separate document. It's usually an appendix, and it should have in it what is being done and the rates that are being charged. Sometimes the rates are in the contract, and I strongly recommend that not happen, that the rates are tied to the work that's being done, and the rate structure is actually in the SOW itself. And that tells you what you're doing, how you're doing, where you're going. It is that communication document that says, here's what I'm building. Not how I'm going to get married with you and get a divorce with you. It is, what are we going to be actually doing in this marriage? And what is it we're trying to achieve? So it's a very, very different document. It is a legally binding document, yes, but truly the most important part is it tells us what you're doing. It drives any work, your charter, your work breakdown structures of your project and how it's going to come out in the end. So that's very, very critical. And that's truly the most important part.
And since the SOW is a legally binding product, part of the contract, who should review your project SOW? Just the legal department? Is that enough?
Well, I think everybody out there knows the answer to that one. When was the last time a lawyer actually delivered the type of project that you're running? And in general, that doesn't happen. So they really don't know what to look for. They can review the document. And actually, whenever we actually review an SOW, we'll quite often say, send this to your legal department. Go have them look at this. It can be interpreted 3 or 4 different ways. And have the legal department go through and hone some of the verbiage around that. There is some of that has to happen. The legal department has to make sure that as the contract butts up with the statement of work, that there's no gaps in between where somebody wasn't supposed to be doing something or there weren't conflicts. Other people people on the SOW side reviewing that can identify the gaps in the conflicts, but so can the lawyer, and they're very good at that. But they don't know how to do delivery. So whenever we start looking, any project manager out there knows that they've had some subcontractor that's given them SOW, and all of a sudden they get halfway through the project and they realize there was a disconnect. And there's no way in the world that somebody who doesn't have the experience of running hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of projects are going to be able to see all those disconnects. A lawyer is looking at that legal side of things. So you really need to have somebody who is well-versed in SOWs and understands what to look for. They've maybe got a set of, here's the type of SOW that we run in this type of industry or this type of industry, and it needs to have these sections. It needs to have these type of things described. If you have this certain type of system that you're building, then you have to have some component in the SOW to deliver that. And so you really need to have that experience, project delivery experience, to do a good review job on an SOW. And there's quite a few people out there. You know, a senior project manager has a huge plethora of data they can work with, and they do a pretty good job of reviewing the SOW until they get into a new area, or they get a little bit lazy because, oh yeah, we talked to them and we know that's good. They understand what we're trying to do.
Okay, and that takes me straight to my next answer because, you know, a senior project manager could do it, but we're talking about this here because you as a consultant, you're offering this as a service. So do you always recommend that someone external like yourself does this review?
Yeah, it does sound self-serving for me to say, yes, we do. But if we think about it, there's many times when we go out and ask somebody external to review things for us, just like the contract. We have the contract reviewed by a lawyer. If I get into marital problems, I go out to a counselor to come back in and look at things because I'm in the middle of the problems. I'm in the middle of that project, and I will read something and say, oh yeah, that person said it's 4 things, and they say it's 4 things because they're really taking these 2 things and combining them. And so that's what it is. And somebody from the outside might say, hey, wait a minute, they're only having 4, there needs to be 5. And you get into the argument about, okay, is there really 5? And somebody else from the outside can actually see things and take away all the assumptions you have because the outside person doesn't have those assumptions. So that's the primary reason to have someone come from the outside. The second reason is because someone from the outside, especially someone who has looked at hundreds and hundreds of SOWs, just has a bigger experience. In most cases, a project manager who's working 3 9-month projects in a year, because that sometimes happens, they'll see maybe a half a dozen SOWs a year, where someone who does this for a living, they see a half a dozen SOWs a month, a week. I mean, they can come in very quickly. And so there's a lot more experience of what actually goes on and how it goes on. Plus, we always keep, not just us, but I mean, people who do this thing in general, keep a bit of a log of, okay, how did that actual SOW come out? And we check back later and say, how did that work? Was there other problems inside that? And we keep a running log of the types of things that we need to look for.
What about confidentiality? Why should I give my project SOW to someone outside my company like yourself?
Well, you give stuff outside your company all the time. You don't just give the SOWs. In fact, it's not really your SOW, it's your subcontractor's SOW that they're sending in. But you obviously give the contract to a lawyer, but you may have subcontractors actually working as project managers on your project, right? So the whole bit of confidentiality is, you're not sending this out to somebody down on First Street to do it. You're going to somebody else. You have a signed non-disclosure agreement to be able to trust that person to keep that information confidential. If we didn't keep it confidential, then you would find very quickly that we wouldn't have any business anymore. So the whole confidentiality thing is not an issue. Where it would really run into an issue where we get a little bit touchy is if there is any sort of HIPAA or personally identifiable information in this that we, for some reason, maybe there's an SOW that includes data, and we will push back a little bit depending on what the data is if it has any sort of personal information in it. Okay, that's about the only place where you have to really worry about it.
Mm-hmm. Okay. You have sent me a real example of such a product SOW that you reviewed for a client of yours. And by the way, we do have a mutual non-disclosure agreement between you and I, so I am okay to see this, but we're not allowed to share this, obviously, with the listeners. This document is 13 pages long, and there are over 70 markups and comments in there. And I mean, there is not a single page that doesn't look like somebody was bleeding all over it in red. The majority of these changes, they're formal, grammatical changes like spelling and, come on, missing periods? I wouldn't have expected that. Why do you do that?
Well, first off, and maybe it's because I'm a writer, I think grammar is important.
Okay.
I just have this thing about grammar, and if you're trying to translate what someone says and make sure it's understood, and you don't use proper grammar, the message gets mixed. So if we say there is 2 projects, okay, wait a minute, is singular, projects is plural, what was it supposed to be? Is the projects, which is it supposed to be singular or plural? Well, I really meant it was supposed to be multiple projects, and I meant the is was supposed to be there, and it was supposed to be just singular project. The other person says, oh, no, it says project, so we're actually doing more than one projects, and it should have been an are. And so you get into an argument about whether it's is or are or project or projects. And that's a pretty big distinction in an SOW about whether you're talking about one or more of something. Okay, so grammar is important. Full stops, periods. Yes, I really get picky about them because people don't use periods, they don't use commas, they don't use em dashes, n dashes, and hyphens correctly. And whenever you start looking at how those things work together, they really change the context of a sentence. So I don't have a period. I have a period at the end of 3 sentences, but I don't have a period at the end of the 4th sentence. Well, was that a missing period, or is it an extra carriage return? So it could be an extra carriage return that was put in there, and all of a sudden that next sentence is actually supposed to be part of the sentence up above, and now I have it, instead of being 1 topic, it's 2 topics. So they really are fairly heavy. So by putting periods in, it makes people understand there's a full stop at that point. I'm done with that topic, starting a new topic. That's definitely part of some of the legal nuances of this, but it also gives the clarity to the document that you need to have. So well-written, concise documents, you'll see us quite often. I don't think in the example I gave you, we'll take a lot of the information and we'll convert it to tables, because instead of having long run-on sentences where you're trying to put across 2 or 3 or 4 points, we throw things into a table so you can see in this condition X, condition Y, these are the 5 conditions that can exist, and try to make that clarity. So we'll quite often take long sentences, break them apart. We will put things out of sentences into tables or illustrations. We'll quite often even draw a picture inside of a statement of work to make sure people understand that there's a division between 2 areas, or how things encompass, or Venn diagrams to show how things overlap and who's responsible for what.
Does only one person review a document like this?
No. In fact...
Okay, so multiple people.
Yes,
yeah.
and so getting back, just to tie these 2 topics together, it's great. In one situation, I remember we had 2 people reviewing the document, and I was actually one of them. And I was reading this relatively long sentence, and it said, blah, 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 and then word hyphen word. Now, not M dash or N dash, which are different, have completely different meanings. It was a hyphen, and so it made a hyphenated word. And I thought that meant that this was a hyphenated word / and then the next word was reports. So I thought it was a special type of report that they were doing. And so I read the sentence to that point, and then the rest of the sentence didn't make sense. So I started inserting commas to say, okay, well, we got that report, and we got this report, and this report, and this report, and this report. We had 5 different reports. And that's what this really means. And I put a little comment on there saying, did I make the edits correct? And I handed that over to someone else in the organization and said, okay, now go proof everything I've done, see if there's anything else you need to add, et cetera, et cetera. And she got to that, and she said, Todd, you got this all wrong. That hyphen is really supposed to be a period, a full stop. So if you go and you read that sentence now, put a full stop there, make the next word capitalized, then you go down 3 words, put in a comma, then it reads like this. And it's really only 1 report they're talking about, not 10. And I looked at it and I went, well, that's an interesting way to interpret that sentence, where both of us were looking at the grammatical view of that sentence. And we both came up with wildly drastic different results. And that is a bit of an exception. In that specific document, that happened twice because they tried to use the hyphen to mean a period. So that's back to the point of, grammatical, but then also not only in grammatical, but when you do that grammatical edit, did you make that grammatical edit correct? And you have somebody else come in and double check that for you. So yes, you always have two people look at these things. Otherwise, you can make some fairly serious mistakes.
Do your customers normally accept all your recommendations?
I think they accept probably, well, if we're correct, I would say that they accept 100% of our recommendations that are correct. There are places where we'll say, this doesn't make sense. Please explain. And then we'll have a discussion about that. And then there's other ones where we'll say, does this mean this? No, this is an industry-specific term that we have that you wouldn't know about that's specific to our company. And so they won't make any changes around that, but then we'll say, okay, we need you to define that term. So if that's truly industry-specific and we don't understand it, how do we know that the subcontractor understands that? So let's get a little table down here of industry-specific terms, get them defined so we know what they are, and everybody agrees on it. And so they won't necessarily accept our recommendation on the edit that we made because it wasn't correct. And the more correct way to take care of that was to go down and put it into a definition table or something like that.
Where is my return on investment in regards to such an extensive review? What do I gain from investing all the time and money into this?
Well, one, in general, these things don't take a lot of time and effort once you send them out. So most good companies are able to turn an SOW review for something like that SOW you had in less than 2 days. So it kind of goes out, 2 days later it comes back. That's usually faster than the lawyer takes on the other half of the document. So we're usually well ahead of them. And the cost is comparably not that expensive. So for something that was in like the one you looked at here, under $3 million for an SOW, we're talking about something under $5,000. We're talking about something it's a $4,700 range. So it is a very cost-effective, very fast way of getting things done. It doesn't slow anything down. Now, how much in a $3 million contract, how long does it take to eat up $4,700? Well, like 4-man days, 2-man days. So yeah. It really doesn't take much. So if you are arguing over is projects or our project on that type of typo, and people are just arguing about, well, wait a minute, I thought we had both these projects. We only have one. Well, wait a minute, we bid it for this and not for that. Right there, $4,700 can go away and evaporate in what would seem like nanoseconds. And one meeting.
Right.
I mean, you could literally have one meeting with head honchos in the room and throw a lawyer in for good measure, and that money has evaporated very quickly. So you're buying an insurance policy is what it is. Just like you have $100 you pay a month on your car insurance, and it's that type of thing. I'm spending about that much money to keep me out of that disastrous situation. The only difference is we get in a lot more SOW problems than we do car accidents.
Yeah. Is there a break-even point? I mean, don't worry about doing this for projects smaller than $50,000 or something like that.
Yeah, I would say, once you start getting down to small SOWs, if an SOW is only worth $50,000 in a project that's, a $3 million project, it might not be worth doing it if that $50,000 piece was enough to break the entire project so it wouldn't work, and that's the most critical piece of this entire thing, it just happens to be $50,000, it might be worth risking that and making sure it's okay. Because again, you could double or triple the size of the cost of that SOW in very, very short order. So it's not the size so much as it is the criticality and how much risk you're willing to take on something in that going wrong. So if you say, hey, something goes wrong here, I got tons of time to recover from that. I'm not worried about it. I can make up costs some other way, then maybe not so much. But if this is a critical piece of that delivery, then a very different story. You're going to be looking at, it's a lot more effective to go and put some insurance policy on this thing now instead of getting into the car accident later.
All right. After all of this discussion, do you have a success story for me? A story where your review has helped the customer and the project?
Well, I'll go back to the one with the grammatical error, because I never did say which way it's supposed to be, did I? And who was right, okay?
What, the one with the report?
The one with the reports.
The dash
is it
reports?
10 reports we're doing,
Yeah.
or is it one report we're doing? Okay.
Yeah.
And when we went back to the person and said, okay, we interpreted this sentence two different ways, depending on how you want to edit this thing, they said, oh, that's a good point. We really need 5 reports there. Right? And so all of a sudden, what we found out is, we didn't know what they were looking for. We could tell it was wrong, but we couldn't tell exactly what they were looking for. They came back and gave us a completely different interpretation of that. And we're able to get the 5 reports in there. They also were able to hone the price of the SOW a little bit as it was, and they actually got a return on their investment just by what they changed on the SOW. The price came down far more than what we charged them.
Do you think that this type of in-depth review of project SOWs is a general practice? Because before you and I talked about this, I didn't know that there was a service available like you offer.
Yeah, I think there's a fair number of companies out there that actually provide this. We've been providing for a long time. We get called in. We're a project recovery and rescue company, right? So we get called in whenever things get really ugly. And that's kind of where we've developed our ability to do this, is because we're looking at SOWs and trying to figure out how to interpret them and switch them around so that they work right. And we renegotiate the SOW right there on the spot to try to make the project run better. So we see it from that standpoint. And that's how we got into this thing. And that's why we do so much of it. Other companies, I think they'll take it and they'll maybe move it to some other senior project manager inside the group. Some people just ignore it completely and move it forward. But I say probably, gosh, that's hard to say. Maybe 20% of the SOWs out there actually do get reviewed by somebody from externally to see if they're clear.
Wow. Okay. And since we're talking about things you are doing, where can people find you on the web? What's the URL of your website?
Yeah, our URL is eCam Inc. So ECAMINC, which is short for eCameron Incorporated.com. So ecaminc.com. And we have a product and services section that you can see where our products are at and drill down, and you can actually find a number of our services, of product offerings that we have. So we've kind of, because we've taken this, the one thing that we do very, very different than anybody else is we offer this as a product. So we have, list prices. This is what it costs for this size project, this size project, this size project, and you'll get it back in X amount of time. And so we have that, so we're not on time and materials. We don't run up the clock. It just, this is what it is, and it gets done. And we found that to be very effective and very easy for people to handle. So that is, when you get on our site, you'll actually see that that's a significant difference in how we do things.
Mm. And of course, we will have a link to your website in the show notes of this episode as well.
Thank you.
Now, I've worked in a fair number of large companies, usually in the IT department, and our IT department got, projects handed to us, large projects from other departments. So should you only do such a review when you go external?
It is definitely easier to recover from these items when they are internal. So if you have, for instance, IT writing an SOW to deliver something to the business, it's easier to recover from that because it's internal. You don't have to go to court. So far, I haven't heard of the business taking IT to court. It could happen here in the U.S., but I haven't heard of that one yet. So it is easier to handle. But yes, I do think that SOW review should happen in that case. And actually, if you think about it, at that point, you could actually get both groups together and have more of a facilitated run-through of what that SOW is saying, and probably solve other problems beyond the SOW issues themselves that would be indicating other fundamental core problems with the project itself, and be able to avert other issues well ahead of time. So internally, yes, I think they are very good. Do they do them? Very rarely, and that's because they always feel that they can always strong-arm the thing. You're not going to end up strong-arm the client and the customer because you're internal. You're not going to have to go to court.
Very well. My final question for you. Many of our listeners are now probably, picking up their own SOWs and looking at them and, do they need a period here? What should they do for a basic review? Do you have a few steps for us?
Well, the very first thing is to make sure that you have all the sections in an SOW that you need to have, okay? And what the most commonly missed section in an SOW is what the supplier's accountability is. And people say, wow, that's like really boring, Todd, and you're going to go after something like that? Yes. The accountability is really tough, especially if you're in a T&M contract. What is it that they're delivering for that amount of money? And where is it that you get that punch point where you're able to say, hey, you're not doing things right. I'm not paying you. We're going to stop. We're going to rework. So looking for accountability. Where you find it is in the front end of where the milestones are at and whether you have certain sets of deliverables. In an SOW, it's very, very common in the deliverables section for people not to give you deliverables, but actually to give you tasks. And they'll say, we're going to deliver, and they list a task instead of a deliverable. Something that's a deliverable is it gets handed over, can be tested, read, approved, or signed off. And so that's a big one. Accountability, looking at deliverables, looking at testing. Those are probably the things that are missing and get the most comment in about any SOW that you can have. Don't forget I got to harp on it again. Don't forget the grammar. Don't forget the spell check. I've seen more SOWs than you can imagine where people have the wrong company name, that we're reviewing it for Acme Freight, and it refers down in the contract somewhere, on the SOW somewhere, to Joe's Healthcare.
Oh yeah, that's the case of in the one where you sent to me.
Well, yeah, actually, in the case of the one we sent you to, I sent to you, there's actually 2 different customers referred to in that one.
Oh my God.
Yes, there's actually 2 different customers. Those are cut and paste errors. And so you're sitting there saying, okay, what's this really written for? And by the way, this is not written for you, dear client. So we have a thing just called we grade completeness of the document itself, which includes all the things like, hey, there was a whole bunch of spelling errors. They didn't spell check it. It's still got draft written on it. It's got different customer names in here. Those types of things we watch very carefully because it's indications to us that they don't know what the customer really wants. They're just slapping in some boilerplate text to make the customer feel good, and they weren't really listening. So that's cues to us to go back to our client and say, go dig into this further here, and if you want us on the phone, we'll get on the phone with you, but let's go dig into this a little bit further because this is boilerplate and they're not really giving you what they heard. They're giving you what they want to tell you.
Excellent. Todd, thank you so much for spending some time with me here today and talking to me about the importance of reviewing your project SOW.
Well, thank you very much, Cornelius, and it's a great friendship we have, and I really enjoy being able to go through some of this stuff with my business. And for the listeners out there, I would go out and be looking for mentors like how Cornelius and I use one another in not just your businesses, but in how you do project management, because once you start talking like this to somebody and get that set up, it really helps to vet something with somebody who doesn't really we do the same thing you do. They give you a completely different aspect of view of your job. So go out and do it.
And that was Todd C. Williams and why formal reviews of project SOWs should be an important part during project initiation. That's it for today. Thank you very much for listening. As always, you can find us on the web at pm-podcast.com. Please send your emails to info@pm-podcast.com, and when you write, please tell me where in the world you are writing from. Oh, and if you like the show, why not go to pm-podcast.com/review and give us a rating in iTunes. And finally, we have this completely unethical saying, a lie a day keeps the audit away. Until next time.